You're listening to Following On here on talkSPORT 2 with me, Neil Manthorp, along with former England fast bowler Steve Harmison, as always. India have named their squad for the T20 series against England, with several high-profile players missing. Does that make England favourites? And what does or will the series mean with over a year to go before the next T20 World Cup? Meanwhile, there have been calls from MPs, a lot of them, for England to boycott their Champions Trophy game against Afghanistan due to the Taliban's abhorrent treatment of women and girls in the country. We'll discuss what it's like being an England player with exterior pressures in that situation and what they could or should do. The newly appointed Kent head coach Adam Hollioake will join us to discuss his new role, and ESPN Cricinfo's Bangladesh reporter Mohammad Isam will discuss his view on the proposed two-tiered test system and their Champions Trophy squad. So plenty to come over the next hour. This is Following On. So, Harmy, Mohammad Shami never made it for the Border Gavaskar Trophy in Australia, but he does return to the Indian side for the 5 T20s against England. But there's no Jasprit Bumrah, Rishabh Pant, Yashasvi Jaiswal and Shubman Gill. They're all rested or otherwise not involved. We haven't had word of any injuries there. But then you think that's 4 big names missing. But you look at who is in the squad. Sanju Samson, Tilak Varma, the 2 leg spinners, Ravi Bishnoi and Varun Chakravarti, they all had a massive impact in the 4-match T20 series they played against South Africa a couple of months ago. Arshdeep Singh's another T20 specialist, the left arm seam. It's a very, very good team. And yet again, there's a lot of depth in Indian cricket, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of depth in their white ball cricket. Questions will come when the red ball team comes to India and to England, and how much depth is in the red ball team. But the white ball team, because of the IPL and the way the boys play over there in that competition, it's common sense that there's going to be a lot of players putting their hands up, ready for the IPL. Get themselves in position to strike while iron's hot in that first game when the IPL does start. And then this will be not a warm up because it's international cricket, but it'll be as close as they'll get to the IPL atmosphere without actually being in the big competition. And the young players that have been given a chance, and it is a relatively young side, but it's an energetic side. It's got bags of talent. It really has. And it looks as though it's a well balanced side with sort of Hardik Pandya in the middle, just holding it all together from an all-rounders point of view. So as much as they're not household names yet, they are very, very good players, and I still make them favourites. Even though England have got a good, strong squad out, still make India favourites in their own back garden.
Rinku Singh is another one that comes to Akshar Patel. They've got 3 spinners. Dhruv Jurel really impressed you, didn't he, during the Test series at the beginning of the year? It's a very, very good. Surya Kumar Yadav, Sky.
He's captain, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's 2, I think, Suresh Iyer, who I think Paditar and Iyer have done really well in domestic, looking at the numbers, and I'm not seeing any of it, but looking at their numbers. And Suresh Iyer has had a decent domestic T20 competition, so has Paditar, and I thought they might have been in where they're more familiar names to people from the outside. But obviously their performances weren't good enough because, like you said, some of these players have performed very, very well in that four match series in South Africa, and they're going to be given their chance. It is, and you look at Bumrah, Pant, Jaiswal, Gill will all be in the team in a year's time when they go to the T20 World Cup. So they're probably the only 4 from the sort of more established players that are probably guaranteed a spot, and everybody else is fighting to sort of make them 15 numbers up. So they'll be right at it and wanting to beat England, because that's a huge scalp. Josh Butler's team, a lot of England players who are out there have got IPL experience as well. Salt's played in the IPL. The likes of Brook, Bethel's going, Liam Livingston's been in, Archer. England have got a very, very, very strong squad, and also Mark Wood. They've all had IPL experience, so I'm expecting this to be a cracking series.
How many hours a week do you spend going through scorecards, Harmy? How much attention do you give the Big Bash and the Bangladesh Premier League and the ILT20 and the SA20? England have got players playing in all of them. I mean, you can waste a significant part of your life if you try and follow all of these competitions.
You can, and I mean, it's great. The competitions are great. I really, I mean, you find yourself torn between what's best for Test cricket, what's best for the elite. For me, the elite part of the game, which is Test match cricket, finding ways and finding arguments and finding how best to preserve for me, the greatest format of the game. But the other formats of the game, i.e., the franchise stuff, is brilliant for some of the players who will never play Test cricket. It will give them a chance to earn, good money, a good life, set their families up. And the fine balance you have between following these competitions around the world, because there's millions of them and you don't know when they're going to be played. I think that is, if you had, and not adults in the room, but an adult in the room who had great leadership qualities to find windows for these tournaments to be played, then I think you'll get Test match cricket well looked after. But the ILT20, I heard Graham Smith say it. I think he was talking to Nasser and others, and he said he didn't want to. It sounded. He says it's going to sound like I'm having a go at the ILT20, but he wasn't. It was just that competition's dangerous for SA20, and that's a tournament around the world that we shouldn't be having, because I think he was more or less saying, well, it's an international tournament. It's not a domestic tournament. And what we talk about a domestic tournament, like you mentioned last week, the European tournament with Scotland, Ireland, and the Netherlands, it's going to be mainly players based from them countries with a sprinkle of overseas players. And the ILT20 is the opposite. and I get what Graham's saying. I think he's right. I think he's 100% right on that it is an international tournament, and their tournaments, that's international. Them tournaments are ICC events. They're not domestic events. So they're the ones that I think are in danger of harming the longer format of the game, not the SA20, not the Big Bash, not the 100 or the IPL. And I think an adult in the room with great leadership qualities will make sure that they don't happen, or they happen at such a time where it's going at the same time as the IPL. So then you've got, your bang average second grade players. They're the only ones that's playing it. So such a fine balance. But you're right. I do cover and see a lot of scorecards because I'm interested to see how a lot of them England players are playing.
The brilliant former New Zealand cricket chief executive, David White's now the chief executive of the ILT20, and he came out in defence of the league, and he pointed out, he said, don't forget how important this region is for global cricket. Whenever a tournament needs to be moved or the IPL needs a new venue, then we're here. And he's right. He's absolutely right. But that's got nothing to do with the fact that they've got 8 overseas players per team, or 9 overseas players per team, and they've got, 1 or 2 locals. Anyway, let's move on. Reminder that every single game on England's White Ball Tour of India is live and exclusive here on talkSPORT 2, ball by ball commentary. Harmy and I can't wait to get out to India once again for the ODI series. And finally, in this section, Harmy, I would normally leave this for part 4, but I want to make sure that I don't miss it. Jimmy Anderson in negotiations with Lancashire for a multi-format contract next year, or this summer, at the age of 43. We've got a new Steve-O. We're going to have a new Darren Stevens. Jimmy, what did you think of that? I mean, it probably didn't come as a surprise to you, but it would have done to quite a lot of other people.
Yeah, it'll be a surprise. It just shows he's not enjoying coaching. It says to me, he's sick of looking at people and throwing balls back going, yeah, well, Bob, but you're still not as good as me. I mean, no, I just think he's got a love for the game. I mean, we were fortunate to be out in New Zealand, and a couple of times he sort of stand at the bowler's end, and you're standing next to him and having a conversation with him about bowling, and you can see he still wants to play. You can see, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's times where your body lets you down, and I don't think Jimmy's body's letting him down at this moment in time. I think Jimmy's body is fine. There's a couple of times you're watching Jim bowl in the nets, and I mean, I think there was one net where I was watching, it was hilarious. Harry Brook was belting everybody, and all the bowlers were tired, and they've now left, and Anderson's now bowling at Harry Brook, and he's turned him sideways 2 or 3 times. I'm thinking, yeah, I get your argument, Jim, and you should still be playing. I've got no doubt about that, but sometimes you do have to move on. But for me, I'm sure he'd be very, very good for Lancashire. Lancashire have got a lot of bowlers in around that 80-mile-an-hour mark. Jimmy will add to that, but Jimmy's skill level will, is in doubt. There's no question of it. And early season, it wouldn't surprise me if he does play 5 or 6 championship games, and he'd be a real handful in the early part of the season, because Lancashire desperately needs somebody to lead them back into that first division, because that county is too big to be in the second division, a little bit like what Yorkshire was. So I'm sure they'll want to bounce back straight away. And I've got no doubt if Anderson puts his mind to it, gets himself, and he is fit, gets himself ready, he'll be an asset to Lancashire County Cricket Club in that first half of the season. And then you might see him go back being the England coach for the second half of the season.
You're listening to Following On here on talkSPORT 2 with me, Neil Manthorp, alongside former England fast bowler Steve Harmison. And next up in part 2, we'll talk about whether England should boycott their upcoming Champions Trophy game with Afghanistan. We know the answer to that, but we'll discuss it anyway. You're listening to Following On here on talkSPORT 2 with me, Neil Manthorp, along with Double Ashes winner Steve Harmison. And you can now watch us on YouTube as well if you want. Just head over to the talkSPORT Cricket YouTube channel and subscribe. Now then, Harmy, a group of 160 British MPs have called for the ECB to boycott the Champions Trophy game against Afghanistan on February the 26th in the Champions Trophy over the Taliban's appalling treatment of women and girls in that country. And David Bumble-Lloyd is amongst a growing list of people who have also called for Afghanistan to be exiled in cricket. It's a complex subject, one that perhaps you and I aren't best qualified to talk about, at least not in depth. I would say, as I've always said, Harmy, that would we be talking about the conditions without cricket? I mean, if Afghanistan is exiled by the majority of the rest of the world, then we wouldn't be shining a light on the appalling treatment and the misogyny and the rest of it in that country. So there is that. What would you be feeling inside the England change room? I mean, you had external pressures, didn't you, in the 2003 World Cup? It wasn't so much of a human rights issue as the Afghanistan one is, but what's going on in the England change room, do you think? Well, there isn't. I mean, what will be going on when they get together?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it'll be so much in the dressing room. I mean, be whispers about it and, little conversations here and there, but I don't think it'll be so much in the dressing room. I think it'll be from higher up. I'm sure it'll be in Brendan's intro, and I'm sure it'll be in Rob Key's, heavily involved in what's going on discussion-wise, because if there's 160 MPs talking about it, it's got to be going to the ECB. So it's got to be going as high up as Gould and Thompson and probably Key, who was having the initial meetings. I'd like to think Rob Key would be keeping the team well away from it, and then bringing the team in only when the team is really has to be brought in on it, i.e. if it gets down to the sort of last phases of, right, we're probably not going to go. But I think Rob Key and Brendan McCullum will probably try to keep the team away from it as much as possible. That's what I would be doing. My experience all them years ago was it wasn't about the sort of the human rights. It was our lives got threatened, and that's when it became real for us. 15 blokes in a dressing room, the Mugabe regime, everything that was going with it, and then obviously Henry Alonga and Andy Flower came in. They were talking about what's happening in their country, but we were having a conversation because somebody was threatening our lives. That was a different story altogether to about what was happening in Zimbabwe. So our decision was, do we go because somebody's going to take have a go at us? So having been in their meetings and understood what them 4 days were like, and having a hell of a lot of people lying to us, trying to get us to go and tell us that we're going to be fine, and then the regime of what was happening in that country was obviously brought up, and why these people were going to take action if we went because of what was happening in their country. Now then that then kicks, moves the story on again to from the team point of view when you're getting told what's happening, what the Taliban will be doing, and what everything that goes on inside the country. So that's when it gets even more messed up in your mind about whether it's right to go or it's wrong to go. It's what I've said, and I said this last week on it. It should not be down to the players. I said last week, do not throw Josh Butler under the bus like Nasser Hussain was not only thrown under the bus, they reversed it back over him. I mean, Nasser, his leadership qualities during that time was unbelievable. I might take the mickey out of every captaincy every now and again, but not out of his leadership in this situation. And I would not like Josh Butler to go through that, or any of the players. If there's 160 MPs feel that strongly, then the British government, if it's that, British government should be bringing England out. Not England saying, not 160 MPs saying, oh, well, sport's powerful, you should be boycotting. I mean, at this main time, I'm a player inside an England dressing room, and I know what's going on in Afghanistan, and I know it's horrendous, and I know everything all about that stuff. But I'm a cricketer who wants to play cricket. We're going into a competition to try and play cricket. The games that are in front of us, Afghanistan's in front of us, and in my mind is to play cricket against, Afghanistan, Rashid Khan and who else. If the politics wants to come into it, let them sort that out. That's what I'd be saying. I'm a player, right? I've got huge amount of sympathies about the women's side of the game, and it should Afghanistan be in international cricket is a different argument altogether. But if I'm playing in that tournament and I'm in a room and Afghanistan are coming in a week's time, the ICC are telling me that Afghanistan are playing in this tournament. So it's up to people above from a player's point of view. So you're asking what's going on inside the dressing room. That's what I'd be saying. Why are we having this conversation? Because it should be higher above. If I'm told to go to Afghanistan, unless my life's been threatening, I'm going to go. It's not as simple as that when 160 MPs go and Keir Starmer and all the the people who are miles away from the whole thing, who are easy saying this. Like you said before, would we be talking about it if it wasn't for cricket? And that's how complex this situation is.
So, I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy on a lot of different levels. Talking of Keir Starmer, he has, I think, quite sensibly said or pointed out that if the ICC just followed their own rules of association, then Afghanistan would be exiled from international tournaments anyway, because they don't have a women's team. I don't want to talk about the treatment of women and the lack of education and basic human rights, because I'm not very good at controlling my emotions. But I mean, Keir Starmer's right. You know what? The ICC, you've got your rules of association. Every member nation has to have men's and women's cricket, and the sexes have to be treated equally. So why are you putting it on the British government? And the other thing, Harmy, is that England and Australia don't play bilateral series against Afghanistan, but they will play them in ICC events. So they if there's a World Cup around, then they'll want the points, but they won't play bilateral series. The question that's two massive examples of hypocrisy there. The other question that has to be asked is, how would boycotting the Afghanistan men's team help those poor women and girls in Afghanistan? How would that? Are the Taliban going to say, oh, well, if you're not going to play cricket against us, then we'll allow women to go to school, girls to go to school, women to go to university? They're not going to change, are they?
No, they're not going to change, and that's why it's got to come from higher up. It's got to come from the ICC. It's got to come if it's the British government feel that strongly and want to highlight it. British government should be the ones that say, right, you're not going. We're going to make sure that the ICC, because that's what it comes down to. It shouldn't be about the players, and it sounds though we're not highlighting what's going on in that country. We are highlighting what's going on in that country because we're having a conversation about it at this moment in time. But it should be a conversation that people can have some. I think people can have some effect on the conversation rather than, I mean, like you said, 15 players in a room saying we're not going to play against Afghanistan. Australia say we're not going to play against Afghanistan. You just then you are leaving. But for me, the flip side should be like, well, what the British Prime Minister's saying. The ICC are going against their rules. I'm sure the same with Russian athletes in the Olympics. Afghanistan, why the ICC not pulling their funding from Afghanistan and saying, right, we will allow Afghanistan women and Afghanistan men play under the ICC banner. The ICC banner, the money that the Afghanistan get, we'll hold that inside and we'll play out of the ICC banner from Dubai, from Abu Dhabi. The facilities there in Afghanistan's men and women can, play cricket. We're not gonna leave them in isolation, and we'll play them under, the ICC banner rather than the Afghan flag. And that there would be more of a powerful gesture towards the Taliban than it would be than England pulling out, than Australia pulling out, than South Africa pulling out. They don't play each other in bilateral series. They only play each other in ICC tournaments. Two of the biggest teams in world cricket don't play each other in bilateral series, but only play each other in major tournaments, and that's India versus Pakistan. And we've seen what's happened with that game, and that game's been moved. So, it just needs somebody strong enough and sensible enough to stand up to get a solution, rather than putting it, like we always do, putting it on the players. Do not put it on the players. They've got more to worry about than the political side of the game, because they don't understand it. Like me and you don't understand it, Manners. If it is a political side that they're trying to have a kick back against, then let the politicians get involved. But guaranteed they'll run for the hills like they always do. I mean, 160 MPs saying don't go. It's very, very simple from saying that from Westminster. Not as simple when you're in that country ready to go and play, and all of a sudden, no, we're not going to give you that. It's all, from a sports man or woman's point of view, it's about competition, and that should always be about competition. It shouldn't be anything else, unless it's your life that's being threatened. That's what happened to us in 2003. Nasser Hussain leadership. Josh Butler doesn't need this. If the 160 MPs want to sit there in Westminster and have a strong view about it, then they should be doing something about it, not Josh Butler, the likes of Joe Root, Mark Wood, Jofra Archer. It's all about playing cricket for me, for them players. It shouldn't be about the political side of it. And that is what really annoys me more than anything else in this situation.
Final word to many of the Afghan women's team who are now resident in Australia. They are still trying to reform and play some games. And also, as much as the Taliban leaders tend to celebrate the men's team's success and send messages to them and champion their players, I have to say that Rashid Khan and Mohammad Nabi, that I'm aware of, have both issued pretty strong statements condemning the treatment of women and children in the country, and urging that the human rights show. That was pretty brave, and I'm not sure that Rashid Khan goes back to Afghanistan very often. I'm not sure that he can. It's highly complex, and as you say, good on those 160 MPs. Good on everyone who cares about conditions for women and children in Afghanistan, and let's hope for a regime change. That really is beyond our level. Anyway, we will keep talking about it, and we hope that somehow there's a satisfactory resolution. You're listening to Following On with me, Neil Manthorp, and the former #1 bowler in the world, Steve Harmison. Next up, we'll speak live to the newly appointed Kent head coach, Adam Hollioake. You're listening to Following On here on talkSPORT 2 with me, Neil Manthorp, alongside former England fast bowler Steve Harmison. If you have missed any of the show, you wish to catch up, you can download the podcast from the Following On feed, available as always via the free talkSPORT app or wherever you get your podcasts. Right, it's the highlight of the show. We're joined live by Adam Hollioake from the Gold Coast, newly appointed Kent head coach. Smokes, fantastic to see you. You're looking very summery and tanned. But Harmy and I were delighted when we read the news, but both quite surprised. We never had you down as a 9 to 5 kind of guy, free spirit, consultant coach and all that kind of thing. So Well, I presume you won't be wearing a suit. I mean, you're still going to be a tracksuit guy, but what attracted you to the job?
It was a strange one, really. I didn't really have any intention of coming back to England. I was sort of more looking at some franchise jobs and stuff like that. And then my agent said, "Look, what about Kent?" And then I always liked going down to Kent. I always liked it. And then they said that I could do the job. You know, I could do 8 months in England and then the other 4 months back here in Australia. So um, I like the sound of that. That's kind of fitted in with what I'm doing. So it was just by chance. It was like, I didn't mean it to be, but I'm actually really looking forward to it. It's really ended up planning out really well.
Adam, you've got, I mean, you whole host of honours from leading Surrey and playing for England and everything that sort of went with an illustrious career that you had. This is a different proposition. Kent have, especially in red ball cricket, they've struggled a little bit. They've had a decent white ball side and a decent white ball history. But does that float the boat even more that you've now got a chance of some young players molding them into a group over the next few years that they have been in the first division, but they've struggled in the first division. Is this a project where you see, I'm really, really excited about trying to influence players both and on and off the field?
100%. Yeah, I mean, I think you know me too well, Harmy. It's I've always loved the challenge, and I've always felt that I would, as you guys rightly pointed out, I've done a lot of consultant coaching, just floating around, and but I think I've been at my best really when I've been leading teams, whether it be as a captain or in the rare cover coach like the Queens under the 17s, under 19s, but I haven't had the time. My kids have been too young for me to make that step and commit to being a full-time coach. So, mate, I'm really looking forward to. I think what it's such a long time ago. Harmy would have been, mate, you'd have been a teenager back when I first started captaining Surrey. But I think probably people don't remember that when I took over, we were bottom of the table there, and we weren't doing so well. I mean, there wasn't two divisions, but we were bottom of the one division. And so, I mean, I love challenges. I think as men we do, like we all need a purpose, don't we? So I'd be lying if I said the last sort of 20 years of my life I've been a little bit of a well, for want of a better word, maybe a bit of a prostitute, just going around doing this and that. And I think that's a time I sort of committed to something and really do what I think that my strengths lies in man management and galvanizing groups of men. So I'm really excited by it. I didn't realize how excited I was until I've started speaking to all the guys back there in England and having one-on-one calls with them and seeing where they're all at and seeing their enthusiasm. So that's got me even more enthusiastic.
You went into you've done a little bits and bobs going back into sort of Surrey, mainly Surrey from a county cricket point of view. But the game has changed. County cricket has changed since you finished playing.
Yeah.
How do you sort of see yourself in that from that side? Because obviously the franchise side comes in. Not a county which has got 100 competition, so the 50 over competition is a bit different. But obviously the red ball, with it being split at the start of the season and end of the season, county cricket looks a little bit different to what you probably really are, what you understand it when you were playing.
Oh, 100%. That's so true, Harmy. But I think I started back in '89. Back then, I think I've been through the 3 day first class cricket. I went through 40 over cricket. 40 over cricket with a curved run up. You weren't allowed to run more than 15 yards. 45 over cricket, 60 over cricket, 55 over cricket, and then when they brought in 20 over cricket. So, man, I've seen it all. So, yeah, it's different, but at the end of the day, it's bowling a ball and hitting a ball and getting guys doing it in the right way for whatever the tournament is. So, it's yeah, it is. It has changed, but it's always changing. It's always changed. So, it has changed a lot since I last was involved in England. But that's the challenge, isn't it, mate? If I can actually evolve with the game as it's evolved.
Yeah, you've got a lot of young players at Kent. Kent have always, produced some good young players. You signed till 2027. Was that contract till 2027 a thing which is, well, we've got young players. The project needs to be a long-term one. And is that something that, you insisted of, that we've got a journey to go on? Give me a chance to get that journey off and running.
I didn't insist on 3 years. That was what they offered me. That was what the job was. The application was for that, and I was happy to do that 3 years. I mean, I see a lot of coaches come in and say, right, I've got to rebuild and we've got to do this, we've got to do that, or we're concentrating on this competition, or we're going to concentrate on white ball or red ball or this or that. Man, I've never done anything other than try and win every single game that I've played, whether that be, if you and me play a game of table tennis, Harmy, I'm kicking your ass if I can. Well, I probably would. I'm not beating you in basketball, but it's it's just, there's, all those things. I just think that you just go out, you try and win every game, and develop along the way. Yes, it's a long-term project. Yes, they've got young players, but if we just go out and try and win from the word go, those players will develop. They'll become better. That's the whole idea of developing, is winning, isn't it? So that's the object.
Adam, I just want to say there's nothing wrong with prostitution, one of the oldest trades in the world, by the way. But on the subject of captaincy, I remember very well in those late 80s, early 90s, you were a revolutionary, out-of-the-box thinker. You were creative, imaginative. You did things that I hadn't seen done before. And I wonder whether, when you look at Ben Stokes's captaincy and Bazball, whether there's a sort of a wry smile, and you think back to the beginning of your career, your international career, and you might think, well, yeah, some of that stuff's been around for a while, guys.
Yeah, no, they definitely copied me, I'm sure. It's no, I mean, there are similarities, but I think at the end of the day, look, we had a strong squad at Surrey, and it's a lot easier to be inventive and creative and aggressive when you've got the squad of players that we had. So I'm quite happy to take the credit for those players that we had, even though. But when you've got a good squad like that, you've got some fast bowlers, you've got some wrist spinners, we've got mystery spinners, we've got guys who bang it, fast bowlers, reverse swingers. It's a little bit easier to be creative than if you haven't quite got the manpower. But and it seems like Baz and Stokes here have got the same thing going on in England. They've got some very talented guys up there, so they're able to do some funky stuff with the talent that they've got.
You talk about the sort of funky stuff with the talent you've got. County cricket has been and labelled as, as the season goes on, players, the not mentally strong ones have a lot of fear of failure. For somebody who, is probably the ultimate man manager, how do you go into sort of combating players who potentially doubt themselves, have doubted themselves throughout their careers, to then now feel as though, like Baz does, like the way you, where that Surrey side did, make them feel 10 foot tall every single time, when they're not always feeling that way, because that's what county cricket can do to you.
Oh, that's what life can do to you, isn't it, Harmy? It's like and I always said that as a captain, I'm quite I'm flattered by you guys saying that I was creative and all that, but for me, I feel like if Harmy and I went out to captain a game tomorrow, we'll probably start with the same field. If it's a 50-over game, he'll probably bowl the opening bowlers for the same amount of spell. We'll probably then bring on the spinners in the middle. So it's quite, I always say, the amount of difference you can make as a captain with tactics. We remember the one thing that pays off, or if you're in the winning side, that's, like Surrey was, that tends to stand out more. But for me, more important than the tactical decisions of the captain is the captain's ability to make his players feel good about themselves. So, I know myself, when I feel confident about myself compared to when I'm doubting myself, is like there's a gulf between the difference in not just as a player. Like I remember back in the day when I used to go into the nightclubs and I was trying to pick up a girl, and you know, when you're confident, you walk in there with your chest out, don't you, Harmy? And you know, and then they're attracted to you. But when you're a bit doubting yourself, they don't come around. So I think that's as cricketers, we're the same. You know, when we walk out confidently. So I feel my job as a coach is to try and build that confidence and make everyone feel as good about themselves as they can, and remove that fear of failure. Is I think that only comes from one way, and that's like working hard in the nets, getting your skills down pat so you're confident in those, and then just making people feel good about that. And then confidence, it just builds momentum as the season goes on. You start winning things, and these things you can get on a bit of a roll with it.
And your experience of life, you know, as a mixed martial arts expert, and you know, we've all read about your experience in Afghanistan. You were very close to the bomb that went off there, and those kind of things give you a perspective on life. And you know, cricket is not, well, it is just a game. It's not.
It is a game.
It's not more than that. I guess I'm sort of digesting the fact that Adam Hollioake's settling down.
Well, I don't know. Maybe other people see it like that, but I don't know. I've always felt like I was. I think I've had a few instances in my life that have kind of forced me in directions which are a little bit different. You know, when my brother died, you know, I left cricket probably, I was pretty young when I left, and then I had a failed property development business, and that kind of forced me to then reevaluate again. And then I went to fighting there for a while, and that couldn't last forever because we get old and get tired of getting hit in the head. So I had to reevaluate. So I've had to reevaluate myself a lot of times. So yeah, that's I think that's probably why people think I've been this big risk taker. A lot of those risks have been kind of forced upon me. So and I guess I just try and respond with whatever gets thrown at me in the best way that I can at the time. So now is this kind of probably one of the first time, probably since when I first took up professional cricket, that I'm actually like, I'm looking forward to going into something and doing something on my terms rather than being forced into going to fighting, or like having to look after my parents after my brother died. You know what I mean? Like those sort of things. So yeah, this is kind of my choice. So I'm looking forward to it.
And Adam, just finally from me, your biggest challenge going into Kent, the job. I know you're on the Gold Coast in a minute. You've done one-on-ones with players and staff and stuff like that. But what do you see as your initial challenges in the first 6 weeks of the job, and then possibly this first 6 weeks of the season?
Well, firstly, I had to go down to the shop the other day and buy some thermals. So I'm not great in the cold, so I'm gonna have to man up there. I'm not the world's toughest when it comes to the cold, but that's creating a little bit of nerves there. But I think it's just, mate, getting to connect with the players. It's, you know, we're in January, and you know the season's pretty much gets off to a flyer in April, and so I've got 3 months to get there and build a bond with those guys and a connection, which is plenty of time. But then just to, you know, get my eyes across what everyone's doing, and just try and get us moving in the right direction. I mean, they had a horrible season last year, so trying to rebuild some confidence there, and just set some short-term goals that we can hopefully reach, and then try and off the back of that build some momentum and get a little something special going on.
Adam Hollioake, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for your time. Enjoy the rest of the sunshine while you can, and good luck.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Cheers, Adam.
You're listening to Following On here on talkSPORT 2 with me, Neil Manthorp, along with Durham Hall of Famer Steve Harmison. Next up, we'll get the Bangladeshi view on the proposed two-tier system in Test cricket. And as always, we'll bring you the final word. You're listening to Following On here on talkSPORT 2 with me, Neil Manthorp, along with Double Ashes winner Steve Harmison. England's white ball tour of India starts next week, and you can hear live and exclusive ball-by-ball commentary on talkSPORT 2 and the talkSPORT Cricket YouTube channel. I thought I'd remind you about that. Okay, it's time to talk Test cricket with our next live guest, Mohammad Isam, ESPN Cricinfo's Bangladesh correspondent. Mohammed, we've heard obviously from Clive Lloyd and a number of people in the Caribbean how they feel about being summarily deposited in Division 2 of this proposed two-tier test structure. But, you know, there's a financial argument for that. But Bangladesh, I mean, it's a country of 185 million. The game's on the up. It's got a massive, massive following. You can tell I'm outraged. I don't know how you and the rest of Bangladesh are feeling about this proposal that you are dumped in Division 2 and stay there with no prospect of promotion and relegation.
Absolute outrage. If you look at the number of teams in Division 2 or the second tier that they have proposed, it's essentially the death of Test cricket for Bangladesh. It's just West Indies and Zimbabwe remaining, and Bangladesh. So Bangladesh have played 40 Test matches against them combined, and Ireland and Afghanistan are, I think, 3 or 4 Test matches. So you're talking about taking out some of Bangladesh's most regular Test opponents like New Zealand, Sri Lanka, South Africa, even India. India has played a lot of Test matches against Bangladesh compared to, say, the other big 3, Australia and England. India regularly tours Bangladesh as latest as 2022. Bangladesh played a Test series in India in 2024. And Sri Lanka, obviously, has been very generous with Bangladesh. New Zealand, another nation, very generous with Bangladesh. So it will leave Bangladesh essentially without Test cricket. So it's whatever the West Indians have said so far, greats like Clive Lloyd and Michael Holding. I completely echo their sentiments. It's going to be a crushing blow for Bangladesh.
Mohammed, is there anything Bangladesh can do? Because you've just mentioned the friends they've got in the world when it comes to Test cricket. Is there anything they can do to get themselves, make the ICC reevaluate what they're thinking of putting Bangladesh in Tier 2? I can see. I'm like Manners. I can see why the West Indies, because it seems as though nobody in the West Indies wants Test match cricket apart from the former great players. The players don't seem to want to play Test cricket because they're going off and playing tournaments around the world. The islands are struggling when it comes to the first class structure. So I can see why the West Indies, not that I think it's right, but I can't see why Bangladesh is put into Tier 2. Is there anything they can do about it?
Of course, Steve, they have a huge market here. Neil just mentioned 185 million population, a thriving cricket market. Some people, think that it's the second largest cricket market in the world after India. The enthusiasm for cricket is still undying. BPL matches after a long time, the last 2 years have been seeing a lot of sold out arenas. There's huge interest in one-day cricket and T20 cricket. Obviously, Test cricket doesn't see a lot of crowd, not like an MCG or maybe a sold out Lords, but it's still popular. It's still big. Whenever Bangladesh wins a Test series, the government, responds. When they beat Pakistan recently, the government handed over bonuses to the players, and there was a lot of celebration. So you can understand that Test cricket is still popular here. And you're right, something has to be done from the BCB or at least from current cricketers. And interestingly, I can go back to 10 years when the first sounds were made, the first noises were made of Big 3 cricket, and the first proposal was to split Test cricket into 2. It was Mushfiqur Rahim, the Bangladesh captain at that time, who voiced his concern. He remains the only active cricketer who had protested against two-tier cricket. We haven't spoken to him yet, but it's a sentiment that I've always got from cricketers, that they feel that Test cricket's health, a lot of it depends on countries like Bangladesh, because it is growing, but there is a huge population and Test cricket has its own audience here. So the BCB has to take a step, even if not with West Indies, Zimbabwe, and the others. They have to take a step themselves.
Mohammed, there's a certain amount of sanctimonious hypocrisy. I know that India have been big supporters of Bangladesh and vital supporters, but you know, let's 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 be honest. How many tours have Bangladesh been invited to in England and Australia in the last 20 years?
2003 and 10 to Australia, sorry, 2005 and 10 to England for 2 tests each, and 2003 to Australia, just the once for Australia. Yeah, ridiculous.
Exactly. I mean, the World Test Championship is fundamentally flawed. I mean, it's very, very imperfect. But what frustrates me is England and Australia don't see, well, particularly England actually, don't seem to appreciate how much good the World Test Championship has done for countries like New Zealand and Bangladesh and South Africa and Sri Lanka. It's given a purpose to the game. I mean, we're surviving on scraps. But now that those scraps have a little bit of nutrition in them, it's fundamentally the World Chess Championship can be improved in so many ways, but it's keeping the best format in the game alive, isn't it?
Absolutely. Just a great example is whenever you are trying to measure the strength of something, a greater part of cricket, like Test cricket, you have to look at what the lowest teams, the lowest ranked teams like Bangladesh are doing. Bangladesh won against big teams this year. They have defeated New Zealand in the World Test Championship. They've defeated Pakistan. They've defeated West Indies in West Indies. And New Zealand, they've also defeated New Zealand in Mount Maunganui in the first cycle. So what I'm trying to say is you give these teams a reason to play better in Test cricket. I know it's slightly unfair to think that why didn't Bangladesh have a reason to get better in Test cricket? Well, they didn't. They didn't really focus on Test cricket that well in the first maybe 15, 16 years. But the moment the Test Championship came in, they understood that playing for points, it brings the two teams closer. So they ended up beating some really good teams, a very competitive series in West Indies recently. And not just on the field, there was like verbal battles every minute. There was superb, theatrics and everything. So it brings these teams together. When they played in Pakistan, Bangladesh had just, I don't know whether you remember, but they had a change of government in August last year. 13 days later, they're in Pakistan. Pakistan welcomes them with their open arms. There are so many contexts to Test cricket because of how Bangladesh are playing. And even these contests between Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, they are like the new rivals. Bangladesh and New Zealand, they have been playing regularly together. Taking those things out of cricket, it just, devalues the whole of cricket, not just Test cricket, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And Bangladesh have named their Champions Trophy squad, Mohammed, and there's no Liton Das, there's no Shakib Al Hassan. Probably the two biggest surprises is the reason for Shakib not in because of his the bowling ban. I know Liton Das hasn't performed as well as he would like, but he got 100. Just as the selectors would, it always happens when somebody doesn't get picked, they get 100 the following week. He gets 100 in the BPL this week. They're probably the two biggest surprises, aren't they?
Yeah, big surprises, of course. I thought they'll still pick Liton on his class, but this white ball form has been quite bad. I mean, 7 innings so far in ODIs without touching double figures. In T20Is also, and interestingly, he's leading well in T20Is for Bangladesh. Won the series against West Indies 3-0. Then in the BPL, not scoring a lot of runs, and then suddenly the day he gets dropped in the afternoon, he gets dropped. He scores a 125 of like 44 balls in the evening, makes the second best T20 partnership of all time with Tanzil Hassan. Yeah, that was a huge surprise, but I still thought that it was very bold of the selectors not to pick him because they do have a few batters as backup. As for Shakib Al Hassan, it's the bowling ban. It's also a bit of politics. It's also a bit of his political background that has played its hand into his selection because the general public, it's split. The opinion is split whether he represents Bangladesh because he was an MP of the previous, autocratic government. It was a hugely controversial decision from him to become an MP, as did Mashrafi Mortaza also. It ruined Mashrafi Mortaza's popularity as well. But it it's far worse for Shakib because it's probably the best player Bangladesh has ever produced, but then too political. And then this strange thing about his bowling action. And the news is that he goes to these bowling tests. He's done it one in Loughborough and one in Chennai. Apparently, he goes through the motions quite normally with his normal, his arm not breaking. And then the moment the test is about to end, he shows them what he has done in that Surrey Somerset game, and that's it. He's banned. Like the ban stays. So we are not sure why he keeps doing it, and that's the story out of his bowling test. And now, it's a worldwide ban. If the ECB bans you, you cannot play international cricket. You cannot bowl in international cricket, and you cannot bowl in franchise cricket. He plays a lot of franchise cricket, so it seems he'll be now playing as a batter.
It's extraordinary. That was going to be one of our final words. Dakar Capitals openers Tanzit Hassan and Lytton Das adding 241 for the first wicket. But just generally, tell us a little bit about the BPL. We're talking about, the fact there are 4 tournaments, franchise tournaments happening concurrently: Big Bash, ILT20, SA20 and Bangladesh Premier League. It seems like there's been some fun and games within the games. We had a 7-for. We had a batsman timed out. Sum up the league for us. Are there big crowds always? Is it financially viable, successful?
It is quite popular. There is big crowds in Sylhet, Dhaka, and Chattogram. I don't know if it's financially viable for the franchises because the BCB doesn't really present to them a business model. It's more of a charity for them. They just don't make a lot of money out of it. This is the last year for them in this second cycle of ownership. So the next season, they'll have to ask for new owners, which will be interesting, whether a lot of people do come forward. But it's usually very competitive. This year, teams like Rangpur Riders, who won the GSL in Guyana, surprise champions there, they're doing quite well. They're, I think, 6-0 so far. The Dhaka Capitals you mentioned, they were 6-0 opposite direction. They won a game. There was a delivery that has caught the attention of everyone, a wide down the leg side that had 7 runs of 1 ball. It was 3 wides actually. The third one went for 4. So that was quite controversial. There's a lot of finger pointing there. But yeah, there was one batter who couldn't tie up his pad cover. Unfortunately, Tom O'Connell from Australia, his first game here. He was not on time. Luckily, the opposition captain allowed him to bat. The run scoring has been fascinating. I mean, lots of big hitting. The thing is, the biggest spender, Kumilla Victorians, they're out again due to their political connections with the Awami League government. So when they're out, you have a feeling that the likes of Dre Russ or Moeen Ali or Sunil Narayan are not going to come. There is obviously that competition between SA20, IL20, and BPL and all these tournaments with signing players. I think IL20 wins it hands down with signing up all these regular BPL guys. So yeah, I mean, the only saving grace for the BPL this season is that PSL has been pushed back to, I think, April, so they can get a lot of Pakistani and Afghani players. So it's been fun. It's good. I mean, it's good for the local crowds, and it's making a few headlines, making a few reels, highlight reels. So it's good.
Mohammad Isam, it's always fabulous to talk to you. Brilliant to get your perspective on things. And I just think the small 7 need to stick together, and it's one for all for one. If Bangladesh are in Division 2, we're all in Division 2.
Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you so much, Steve.
That was Mohammad Isam, ESPN Cricinfo's Bangladesh correspondent. Just a couple of minutes then to go, Harmy. I've given away my one final word, but there's a couple of others. Liam Haskett is a Adelaide strikers bowler. Not many of our listeners and viewers would have heard of. He was on debut and in the Big Bash, and he was hit for 6 by Nathan McSweeney, and there was a crowd catch, and it was his dad who looked suitably filthy, didn't he? He threw the ball back onto the field in absolute disgust. How dare you hit my son for 6 on debut?
Yeah, well, at least he caught it. I think Freddie did it once to his dad at Edgbaston, and then Colin dropped it. So, yeah, I think that was in 04 or 05. Andrew hit one into the crowd, and I won't care Colin's hands. Colin's a good cricketer himself. He's bucket hands, and he managed to slip it through. So, no, Liam Haskell's dad got a decent pair of mitts on him. I'm sure his son would have rather him standing on the 30-yard circle other than the 100-meter boundary, but he did take the catch.
And a final word to Ira Jadav, a 14-year-old girl who scored 346 not out off 157 balls to help her team Mumbai to a total of 563 for 3 in the women's under-19 one-day trophy. They then dismissed their opponents Meghalaya for 19 to seal victory by 544 runs. There's a story like that, extraordinary achievements by extraordinarily young and increasingly young cricketers every week out of India, isn't there?
There is, and what makes it more special, it's a young Indian girl who we talk about the women's game getting to all four corners of the world, played by everybody. No matter what ability, just play the game because we all love it. And when we see stories like that, players excelling and going out and scoring big runs, I'm sure that name will be one to watch for in the future.
You've been listening to Following On here on talkSPORT 2 with me, Neil Manthorp, along with former England fast bowler Steve Harmison. And we'll be back at a similar time next week to build up to England's white ball tour of India. Every ball, as I said, live and exclusive here on talkSPORT 2. But for now, this has been another Following On.